Everyone for joining us. Before we get started, I need to let you know that this WebEx call is being recorded and may be posted on DOE's website or used internally. If you do not wish to have your voice recorded, please do not speak during the call. If you do not wish to have your image recorded, please turn off your camera or participate by phone. If you speak during the call or use a video connection, you are presumed consent to recording and use of your voice or image. We have started the recording now. So good afternoon, everyone. As you know, my name is Piper O'Keefe, and I am the designated federal officer for the Department of Energy's 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board. I want to echo Missy's welcome of everyone to today's meeting, and once again, want to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. I would also like to introduce to you again the chair, Missy Henriksen. Thank you so much to you and all of your members for your continued service and dedication to this advisory board. We have an exciting agenda today, and Missy will go over the content of our meeting. Please note that we'll do our best to stick to the times outlined in the agenda. We'll be tracking time for each section of the meeting, and we'll let the group know when time is almost up. Copies of all meeting materials and public comments will be available on the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board website. I posted the link to the webpage in the chat at the beginning of this meeting. I would like to add that only members of the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board and certain members of DOE may ask questions of presenters. According to FACA, we'll maintain a public comment period, which will take place at 1:40 p.m. For members of the public requesting time to make a public comment, please limit your remarks to no more than 3 minutes. For those public commenters who have not pre-registered, please send an email to me before this public comment window at ewab@hq.doe.gov. If there are any members of the press, we welcome you. If you have any questions for our speakers, please contact them directly. For questions for DOE staff, please reach out to me via email outside of the meeting. As per FACA, a summary of this meeting will be prepared and made available within 90 days of this meeting. This summary will include a description of the matters discussed and any conclusions reached by the committee. As I noted earlier, in order to maintain an accurate summary, this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I will now take roll call. When I call your name, please repeat your name and organization. Dr. Deanna Ahmed.
Dr. Deanna Ahmed, Our Next Energy.
Amanda Cage.
Amanda Cage, National Fund for Workforce Solutions.
Maureen Conway. Becky Irvine. Becky Irvin.
Becky Irvin, United Auto Workers.
Sarita Gupta. Missy Henriksen.
Missy Henriksen, the Center for Energy Workforce Development.
Chris Levesque.
Chris Levesque, TerraPower.
Dr. Tom Krieger.
Tom Krieger, NAB2.
Dr. Dan Marshall. Anne McMonigal. Dr. Gerard Melanson.
Gerard Melanson, National Green Jobs Advisory Council.
K7. Kay, could you say your name again? I think I heard you. Dr. Jermaine Worrell.
Dr. Jermaine Worrell, Augusta Technical College.
And Allison Ziogas. Okay, in closing, thank you again to the members of the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board for participating in today's meeting and for your ongoing service to DOE and the country. I'm looking forward to the discussions today. And with that, Madam Chair, I convene this meeting of the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board.
Thank you, Piper. And I do see Dan has joined us. I want to make sure that the minutes do reflect that. I know he came in after the roll call. So hi, Dan, welcome. Nice to have you here. Piper, would you be kind enough to pull up the slide deck, please? So as Piper's getting us to the level set here, I think everyone knows as we go through the course of today, we have the great opportunity to hear from each of the subcommittees about what their deep dive findings have unearthed for us. We will get an opportunity to hear some of the highlights of their presentations. We will be able to hear what's missing, perhaps, as we go through the reports. And we will also take a little time to walk through the logistics associated with the next steps of the report development. Piper, if you could advance the slide, please. So a couple things I'd ask as we're going through the review of the different reports. First of all, I think there's probably 4 things I would ask everyone to take a listen out for. First of all, let's look for broad themes that may be emerging. While we operated as 4 separate subcommittees, I'm sure as you read the different submissions by each of your colleagues, you probably recognize there were some commonalities and areas of overlap. So I'd ask us to be attentive to those. Also with that, any major gaps, anything you might have expected to hear from one of the other operating groups, or anything that you might have had reflection on within your own group. So many times for me, as soon as I submit something, that's when the biggest moment of brilliance occurs, is right after it goes to someone else. So anything that might be missing either from your reports or any of your colleagues' reports. And then also if there's any inconsistencies or differences, for instance, in what the verbiage is saying versus what the collective recommendations are. Let's look for any discrepancies that might exist there. And I know the Berkeley team, as always, is very welcoming of this group's guidance. So my 4th request to you would be, as you're listening and as things may really stand out to you, if there's any particular guidance or direction you would like to suggest to the writing team, let's make sure to pull that forward for today. Once we go through all of those reports, we will, as I said earlier, spend a little bit of time talking about logistics. We'll talk about the timeline that remains before us. I feel like whatever is left in that timeline, we've already crossed off the biggest lift of that, which was actually submitting the first drafts of the various subcommittee reports. So I think everything from this point on will seem very doable and very encouraging as we continue to move forward. So with that, we are going to turn things over for our first report out from the Combating Barriers to Energy Employment. And for that, we will turn it over to Deanna.
Thank you, Missy. Great. So I'm going to just start with a summary and then we'll talk through our various recommendations. So, we believe that delivering a just transition for workers, diversifying workforce, and improving job quality measures as new sectors grow is critical, especially for communities that have been traditionally left behind. This means providing real opportunities and removing barriers for individuals, including women, veterans, people of color, people with disabilities, youth, and people in rural areas to get into the workforce and stay into the workforce. So our committee worked over the past several weeks in identifying recommendations, which I'll go through now. So the first recommendation that we have is to require specific wraparound services for workers to be a part of community benefit plans, including childcare support, elder care support, transportation assistance, scheduling flexibility, mental health support, and on-site food services. DOE requires community benefit plans as a part of all funding opportunities and financing programs made available in the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act and the IRA. And so there's an opportunity to negotiate community benefit plans that include wraparound services such as those aforementioned and prioritize grantees who include such services. The next recommendation that we offered was to allocate subsidies for childcare support, creating funding opportunities for childcare advocacy organizations, and creating a repository of organizations that employers can partner with. Some of the things that we felt that were important here were Number one, incentivizing providers and employers to offer childcare that supports the unique needs of energy workers, including non-traditional schedules and workers who are employed at remote or irregular locations. Offering free or reduced cost childcare services to participants in DOE job training programs, increasing funding opportunities for childcare advocacy organizations, and incentivizing employers to provide benefits that include backup childcare for when emergencies arise that prevent workers from their usual childcare providers. The third recommendation that we put together was improving and increasing access to free and low-cost education and training programs, including asynchronous options, paid training programs, and on-the-job training. Some of the factors that we felt were important here included creating open source training curricula based on industry best practices via public-private partnerships with educational institutions and partners in industry. Where possible, making training materials and courses online and asynchronous to make them more accessible to workers, providing funding to subsidize or eliminate costs to workers to participate in these programs, and where possible, offer paid and on-the-job training opportunities to reduce barriers to entry for low-income or unemployed workers. To support existing apprenticeship programs, as well as expansion of apprenticeship programs into emerging fields within the energy industry, to focus specifically on increasing the number of skilled electricians to address shortages as they are essential to installing EV charging stations, upgrading buildings to improve energy efficiency, and deploying clean energy technologies, among other important projects. To develop training programs focused on battery workers, one of the fastest growing job sectors since the passage of the IRA, working with growing and augmenting existing job training programs to include key knowledge, skills, and abilities for clean energy careers. And finally, to provide best practice recommendations, incentives, and subsidies to employers who provide substantial on-the-job training opportunities, especially to members of marginalized and historically underrepresented populations. Our fourth recommendation was to increase youth exposure to clean energy learning and career opportunities by integrating energy learning into K-12 curricula and partnering with community organizations and NGOs. Within this, we felt that contributing to public-private partnerships that are working on incorporating energy learning into K-12 STEM curricula with a specific emphasis on exposing students to careers in emerging energy fields was important. An additional factor we felt was important was providing access to DOE resources and sites to schools and students, including virtual and in-person field trips that teach students about energy research, clean energy generation, and manufacturing. And then finally, forming new partnerships with and providing resources to community organizations and NGOs that cater to youth to encourage learning about clean energy, energy careers, and trades, with a particular focus on organizations that serve historically underrepresented populations. Our fifth recommendation was to increase awareness of and exposure to energy career pathways for job seekers and provide career services to workers seeking these opportunities. Of these, we felt that advocating for the recognition of energy careers as a category in career frameworks, such as the national career clusters, was important. Investing in marketing campaigns to promote energy jobs and careers, particularly focusing on historically underrepresented and marginalized populations. Funding additional online resources to job seekers, such as career maps, career matching tools, and informational materials, and funding career counseling programs that provide one-on-one services, such as resume review, advice on finding the right career opportunities, interview preparation, and referrals to current job opportunities. And services like this should be free of charge and should be actively promoted to historically underrepresented and marginalized populations. Our sixth recommendation was to work to make the energy workforce more accessible to women and non-binary people, BIPOC populations, workers with disabilities, and other historically underrepresented groups. And within this, we felt that prioritizing gender and race-based programs and cohort strategies tailored to the needs of underrepresented populations in workforce development programming was important. Working with local programs such as community groups, neighborhood centers, affordable housing groups, and other smaller community organizations to recruit diverse talent, and working with employers and unions to ensure robust worker protections and anti-discrimination policies are implemented across the industry. And finally, our seventh recommendation was to increase focus on worker retention in energy and infrastructure fields with a focus on developing pathways for career growth. So within this, defining career pathways for workers already employed in energy and infrastructure with opportunities to obtain free or subsidized training that will allow them to move into higher paying positions was really important. The encouragement and incentivization of employers to provide increased family sick leave, more vacation days, and faster accrual of vacation days, as well as mental health support was important, particularly in manufacturing. Incentivizing and encouraging rotational opportunity programs and job shadowing opportunities that allow employees to diversify their skills and explore opportunities for career development. And finally, promoting cross-generational learning and mentorship to allow new workers to benefit from the knowledge and wisdom of more experienced, more senior workers. So these were our recommendations. Thank you for allowing us to review them with the group, and mindful that there's probably a lot of intersection with the other work that folks put together. Back to you, Missy.
Deanna, thanks to you for sharing the list, and to you and your whole team, which I know is Amanda, Kay, Sarita, and any others who popped into some of your meetings for putting together such an incredible starting point for discussion today. So with that, I'd like to open it up to the full advisory board for any questions, comments, or areas of discussion for this particular work team.
Just a quick comment of, yes, I agree with everything. I think we talked a lot about childcare as well. Across the board, I think it's just going to be a barrier that all states around the country have to deal with if we really, really want to unlock potential talent. So thank you all. Great job.
Thank you.
And it's Chris Levesque. I'm not on this committee, but got to interface with them some and heard some of the discussion. And I agree with all the recommendations. And, you know, one thing I came away with in a really strong way out of hearing all this is, you know, we need to improve access for all of these kind of underserved and underrepresented communities, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we're going to need the people. We're going to have a shortage of workers in clean energy. So this isn't just about you know, diversity, which is a great noble effort in its own. It's about, we can't keep turning to the same communities to provide the workforce we need, because we won't have enough people to meet the nation's energy challenges.
Absolutely agree, Chris. Thank you for that comment.
Any other comments?
Yes, this is K7, first try. I forgot to add to this report, speaking about serving access to, you know, women and groups of people from the underrepresented populations. And coming from a tribe, I'm real familiar with what's going on in Indian country. And so I think their recommendation number 6 is just a comment on working with tribal nations. And I can add information to this section because we already have existing legislation available that provides all the wraparound services on workforce projects. So working with tribal nations on or near energy projects is going to be important.
Absolutely agree, Kay. We'll work to get that added.
I'd just like to make the comment. I feel like you all gave us a bonus number 7. The overachievers in you said we're not just going to address the barriers to getting people there. If we're going to go to all of the effort and make sure we're jumping through hoops to get people to the industry, you also have focused on retention, which is also commendable to take a look at that as well. So thank you for bonus number 7.
Thanks, Missy.
Sure. Okay. If there are no other comments, we will once again thank you guys for a great work product here, and we will move on to the second group, which will be effectiveness of DOE programs. And for that, we will turn to Jermaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and very honored to work with Chair and Dr. Dan Marshall. We're a mighty but small group, and so we bring to you a few recommendations from a lot of work that has been done. I do want to just quickly thank both Missy and Dan. The amount of work that we've been putting in over the last few weeks has been incredible, but we're trying to get that into 5 major bullet points, and so here they are. The first one, again, we talk about effectiveness. Let me start with this. When we look at effectiveness, we really were tasked to see how DOE is really looking at workforce development across all spectrums. There are a ton of offices that are doing fantastic work, but is workforce development embedded in all areas in terms of a metric that they're all working towards? And at least from our initial findings is that we have places that are doing incredible work, and then we have areas that are doing some, but not as impactful. And so our first recommendation is just to ensure that all offices, all projects have a workforce development component to it. We think that's a pretty easy lift, but more importantly, we just want it to be outwardly transparent and very easily accessible if anybody's looking for it, to see what is the Office of Science doing as it relates to workforce development, what is MESC doing as it relates to workforce development. So just ensuring that that's captured, and more importantly, ensuring that they're connecting on what they're doing across the board within the organization. This kept coming up. I think it was kind of highlighted in Group 1's initiatives about awareness, but I think it's so important to really design and implement what we consider a national campaign to highlight clean energy jobs across this country. I always tell people you can't do what you don't see. And I think that's important, even from my own experience as a college president. We have business schools, we have health science schools, we have arts and sciences. Technically, you cannot go and major in energy. That pathway does not necessarily exist as a singular sector. It's embedded within a engineering school, or it's embedded within a STEM school. But there's really not a clean pathway to energy jobs as a singular focus. And we think that's a missed opportunity given the millions of opportunities within energy. But we need to make a major national push to highlight those opportunities so that individuals who are not aware know that these jobs exist. And more importantly, that would then funnel into our K-12 systems all the way up to the post-secondary sectors. And so a national push. There's a lot of ideas on how we do that, but we definitely feel strongly that if we're going to meet these benchmarks and these goals that the administration has for us by 2030, 2050, the nation has to really come on board and really push this from a global perspective. Third is continuously funding targeted populations, again, whether that's underrepresented minority populations, individuals that may not have had access to education, but the funding of that is essentially crucial. Individuals may not have funding to get training, whether to be an electrician, to be a welder. And so just ensuring that those fundings are available, and not just in higher ed, but also again, K-12 and any other nonprofit entity that's doing work in this space. I think it's incredibly important that we keep that funding broad. We keep those targets pretty broad. And so our committee did not specify specifically who, but we do know we need to continuously increase the funding. And then secondarily, one of the greatest challenges, and I can speak for this from the community college sector, is the other things that go along with training funding, which is supplies and equipment. I gave few examples that equipment itself can be 6 figures. Many colleges literally just do not have the funding to purchase that equipment. And then secondarily, you need to have trained faculty members to actually train on those advanced technologies and then keep them up to speed on the ever-evolving technology itself. And so really looking at how DOE positions its funding now for grants and scholarships and internships in science and research, how can some of that money or potentially new funding come into play to really help accelerate the needs that are specifically in our community and Pauli Tech institutions, again, around equipment and technology. That's going to be a big deal. And I feel very strongly, speaking for other college presidents, that level of investment would definitely pay off in the long run for us. And then lastly, recommendation that we talked about was really, again, starting with number one, this workforce development metric. So ensuring that all departments within DOE have a metric around that. Number five really talks about how are we doing inter and intra-agency collaborations around workforce development. So we don't want them to have metrics and they're working towards it, but then also working in isolation. We think that's a losing strategy. We think there's a lot of great things happening. We found that out through our Zoom calls with department heads and about what they're doing. And it was very, very good information. And the question was, how are you linking that with your other areas? How are you networking collectively and across departments to ensure that we're not duplicating, but more importantly, how do we combine resources to be even more effective? And so we are looking for not only intra, but inter. That also includes working with the Department of Labor, Department of Education, ensuring that workforce development is not a singular focus of DOE, but I think they can combine efforts across several federal agencies, again, to strengthen some of this work in a global capacity. And again, within the agency itself, we felt like there were opportunities for them to connect. I do want to give them credit because we did find out that they do talk on a frequent basis. But one of the things that we will love to do is just kind of see that be strengthened as we move forward, specifically around workforce development as their key metric. And so these were, again, essentially 5 out of many summaries that we came up with, but this is at least our initial proposal out to DOE. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'll be glad to entertain any questions. And of course, you and Dr. Marshall, feel free to jump in as well.
Thank you, Jermaine. Appreciate that. Any questions or comments for this group?
I have a question about number 3. First of all, appreciate all the work that you all put into this. When we were doing some of the meetings with different departments of or different subgroups of the Department of Energy, I was surprised to hear all the different programs that were already established. That was just an education in itself. But around number 3, one of the things that I was surprised to find, and I'm curious if you all found this within your subcommittee, that there was a lot of work that was done sort of at the K through 12, sort of general STEM education and career, sort of awareness work, and then a lot of work done at the sort of PhD level, like very intensive high-end education, and not as much done in the middle. And curious as to other institutions, especially looking at community colleges or other sort of direct training organizations. Was that something that you all also identified, or is there ways that thinking about how to support that sort of mid-level post-secondary space that, sort of more in the like two-year degree, associate's degree credential kind of space?
Dr. Marshall, you want to jump in first? I definitely have a response, but I'll let you go first if you would like to.
I was going to make a different point, Jermaine, so why don't you take this?
Okay. To answer your question, absolutely, Amanda. That's one thing that I spoke to our group about. Again, it came back to how are we going to fund technology? How are we funding professional development for faculty? And how do we fund more faculty to teach, again, some of those skilled trade, high intensive areas? So to your point, yes, a lot of money, like an Office of Science, is going towards research, increasing research capacity, increasing PhD opportunities. But I made a pretty bold statement that we definitely have to make more investments in that post-secondary credential mark. That's not a baccalaureate and or PhD, but those certificates, diplomas, and associate's degrees, that is the sweet spot. And quite frankly, when you look at the millions of technicians that we need, the millions of welders, that's the area that level of investing is not as robust as in the other areas. I definitely do not want to take away from K to 12 because obviously that's our pathway in to post-secondary. But to your point, that gap to me, at least personally, I think is pretty significant. And there are ways to increase total funding, or we're going to have to repurpose some funding in maybe other areas to try to fill in some of those voids in the future.
Dan?
So just on that point, it's good to see that in several parts of the Department of Energy, there is a recognition of the need to move towards providing the sort of services and resources to train technicians and to hit that kind of middle area, occupations that require not only a high school degree, but some level of community colleges combined with on-the-job training. And there's several programs inside DOE that are moving on that in that direction. And otherwise, I wanted to raise a point about the research challenge. As we looked at our little mission in this subcommittee, it was particularly challenging to identify the examples that are relevant. I mean, we live in such a big and diverse country. There's so much going on at the state, regional, and local level that it's a challenge to find those programs and identify them, but it's also a great opportunity for how this particular report could stand out. And I read over the full report from the first Combating Barriers to Energy Employment subcommittee, and they just did a remarkable job of identifying those local programs. That's going to be, I think, a challenge for us as we go forward. And I'm hoping we can all put our heads together and identify that local experience and the best practices that flow from them.
Thank you, Dan, for the comments, and also thank you for the solicitation of additional feedback and help that may be important as we continue to work through this process. Any other comments or questions for the group?
I had a comment, Melissa, and it's not something that wasn't already said. I just wanted to strongly agree with this point that it does seem that within existing DOE programs, there's a lot of attention paid to high-end technology, PhD programs. You know, the national labs have driven a lot of that. You can see at universities across the country, multiple programs funded by DOE. But you know, when we go and look more at craft level, there's a real weakness there, and you know, part of it is kind of our national identity. We're always, you know, going for the tech, but we really let the craft sector kind of get weaker. And you know, DOE is not the only one dealing with this. The Department of the Navy just came out and said, wow, we're still seeing a weakness in the supply chain that's kind of, you know, like what we were seeing in COVID, we're still seeing that. So, you know, if you look at the business news, it's totally dominated by tech. You know, all the tech companies are doing better. So it's easy to conclude, oh, everything's great, but we still have some serious limitations in the country in, you know, in our ability to bring craft people to projects and craft people to the supply chain. So this, you know, I think I'm just repeating what others have said already with extra emphasis. Thanks.
Thanks for the comments, Chris. You know, one of the expressions our organization has started to use recently is the energy industry needs GEDs to PhDs. We need everything there in the middle for sure. And this conversation just reinforces that. And I can't necessarily see hands raised, so I'm hopeful, Piper or Maya, maybe you can help identify if anyone else has their hands raised or any comments. Okay, hearing none. I'd just like to make one other comment before we leave this slide and move on to the next group. In regard to item number 1, including workforce development in all DOE projects, to underscore maybe the importance there, I was invited recently to join a committee within DOE that deals with electrification, particularly of the grid and modernization of the grid. That is not an area where I have a tremendous amount of expertise. And I thought for a moment the call was misdirected and they meant another colleague. And they really explained that they have a tremendous amount of subject matter expertise on electrification and grid modernization. But all of their conversations had become a little circular because they all ended up going back to workforce development. And they realized it was very difficult for them to be talking about the future and what was needed on the technical part of the industry without the interconnectivity to workforce development. So particularly glad to see this recommendation in the report. And hopefully this will be something that can be a catalyst to serve as inspiration for other groups that are really not putting the workforce as a secondary consideration, but looking at it as primary as we look at the technical advances. So thank you to that team. Pleasure to work with you all. And if we could move on to the next, which will be measuring and assessing job quality. And for that, we will turn to Maureen Conway. Maureen, if you're speaking, you may be muted. Maureen?
Can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to thank my fellow committee members, Becky Urban and Chris Levesque, who worked with us on these recommendations. And just to jump in, our first recommendation, and I think, sort of our theme overall for job quality is just, it's clearly an interest, but it needs more detail and focus. So one is just to ensure that DOE staff are familiar with DOE's definition of a good job and how it applies to workforce investments and other DOE programs. DOE does have a definition of good jobs, and it's very helpfully aligned, I think, with the Department of Labor and Department of Commerce's good jobs principles. I think that's really helpful. And it also, sort of does note the importance of sort of management in ensuring good jobs and the role that sort of management and companies can play in making sure that workforce standards are being adhered to. But sort of thinking about DOE's programs in relation to sort of the job quality outcomes in our conversations with different sort of program areas, the understanding of that definition and how it applied to their work seemed a little mixed. So it seems like it would be very helpful to have some workshops or other education opportunities to help staff really fully understand what is the definition of good jobs and what their role is in terms of encouraging good jobs with the work that they do. So that was the first recommendation. Relatedly, I think DOE needs to develop a baseline understanding of job quality. We found that there's sort of and I think this is borne out in DOE's report on the energy workforce, that there's this assumption that energy jobs are good jobs, that they pay well and this kind of thing, but there isn't enough data to sort of track this and understand it. We would. I'm referring to DOE's United States Energy and Employment Report 2023. The first sentence actually is that the U.S. energy system is rapidly transforming, driven by policies that expand production, foster innovation, support domestic manufacturing, and create high-wage jobs across America, while substantially reducing emissions. And the remainder of the report does not include any information about the wages paid in the sector. So I think there just needs to be more attention to sort of where are these jobs good jobs, and where might there be opportunities for improvement. And I think this is really important related to some of the recommendation made previously about sort of how to raise awareness of energy jobs. I think it is important when we think about how are we raising awareness of energy jobs to try to address a workforce shortage, that we're also looking at what are the quality of those jobs and making sure that we are fully understanding what those jobs offer to people and communicating that well. So I think this is a really important issue to attend to. So then flowing from that, you can develop, and I think DOE does need a process for developing job quality assessment standards and accountability mechanisms. As I mentioned, it's frequently a goal to encourage good jobs and job quality in the work, but you need sort of some way of assessing progress towards that goal. And there didn't seem to be as much attention to that. There are some helpful things. I think in a number of the solicitations where they encourage community benefits agreements. They encourage preferences for working with union employers. They do note that the sector in general has a higher rate of unionization than, you know, sort of the labor force overall, but nonetheless, it's only about 11%. So, so really thinking about how do we understand job quality and what are, as we're funding different workforce programs and thinking about what are those outcomes relative to the kinds of jobs we're hoping that they're connecting people to, how are we looking at what those outcomes are and understanding if they are in fact good jobs. And the last point is, again, it's all sort of flow in a order. As we think about what are assessment standards, thinking about what are some low burden methods for collecting data to assess performance against job quality standards. I think there are some low burden methods that you can collect data from companies, from workforce educators that use existing data systems. So really thinking through what those are and you know how that information can be best used to assess job quality, and then where needed, supplement it. The other thing I should mention within this is also ensuring that to the degree possible, data are always disaggregated by race and gender, so that we can you know, try to build that diverse workforce that also has been named as a goal for this work, and also to understand if there are challenges that particular populations are facing as we want to try to include them. We can't fix a problem if we can't find a problem. So, so that's, I think I'll stop there and see if my colleagues on the committee would like to add anything.
I might add something, Maureen, and again, this has to do with all the kind of learnings I heard from fellow advisory board members. And one thing I learned from you, Maureen, was the, you know, the formal definition of job quality, like coming from the Aspen Institute, is it's a very good one. And one thing that it doesn't say, which is important for energy, is that you know, job quality doesn't mean 40 hours, all the work is in one place, where of course that would be nice if people didn't have to travel, but you know, the nature of energy jobs, especially, you know, in the next few decades, is that there's going to be many, you know, projects, for example, laying new transmission lines, which we're going to need a lot of, that isn't going to be 9 to 5, and it isn't going to be in a factory. So, and we can actually connect that back to access, right? Sometimes if there's remote work involved, or let's say a 6-week course or something, that can be enough to create a barrier to some underserved community. Some community maybe where they can't travel, they're supporting their, you know, their whole family. So that was just the takeaway I had from listening to my colleagues in the discussion, and I was impacted by it. I think we do need to recognize, you know, energy jobs are good jobs, but they're not going to all be in a factory 9 to 5. We're really going to need to recognize it's about getting people out onto the projects.
Amanda?
Yeah, I just want to double down on Chris's point, and I know, like for the job quality conversations that we've had in my organizations, where we sort of sit in the job quality conversation is to create some baseline definitions, and a lot of what we talked about in this context is, you know, tightening and communicating and adhering to some of those more generic job quality elements. But I do think there's some level of like energy jobs, or the sector is different in some ways, and then creating what quality looks like in reference to some of those elements. And they can be things as, you know, like Chris mentioned, 24-hour work is like a dynamic of energy work, right? There's outdoor work is an element of energy work, where there's some things that are very specific to the industry. that we could clearly define, like, what does quality look like with respect to that element that is more common in energy jobs than in other jobs. I think there's sort of another layer of depth that we could do around, or the Department of Energy could do around thinking about what that looks like.
And I guess I just want to say in response to both of these things that I feel like I wouldn't want to get so one, I agree, not all jobs are going to look the same, and energy may have some unique characteristics that are going to be the nature of the job. I think there's a way to think about sort of job quality of energy jobs generally and job quality variability within energy jobs, right? So you may see some companies have really good retention and some companies have really not very good retention. And so you might want to look at what are those different practices that they have that one company seems to be doing a better job keeping their workforce and keeping them engaged than another does. Some companies may be having a hard time finding workers, and some companies might not be having a hard time at all. And one of the things I noted in the report I mentioned about energy jobs that DOE did was they noted that some companies said that they were having a hard time paying competitive wages. Some companies with unions were less likely to say they were having a hard time finding workers than those that didn't have unions. So there might be things we want to look at within the industry to see how do we help companies think about what are the practices that are going to help you bring people into your company, keep them, develop them, and really make good jobs and have that power your business. So I think, I guess what I want to say is, I think we should be careful about generically assuming energy jobs are good or not good, and instead sort of say, here's what our standards are, and here's where we see variability, and here's what we can learn from that to really kind of move things forward. So that's how I would think about it.
Maureen, I like your wording. It seems very encouraging, and it's not a judgmental aspect, it's an encouraging aspect, which I think will be well received. Dan, I see you have your hands up.
Yes, I wanted to raise an aspect of good jobs that is often not considered, and that has to do with the nature of the jobs themselves and the understanding that workers bring to them. So I work with the Battery Workforce Initiative, Department of Energy sponsored initiative. We are developing a comprehensive training program for hourly workers moving into the battery industry. We started out by consulting more than 30 employers and unions. One thing they said about battery manufacturing is in this particular sector, it's important for our workers to understand the entire battery manufacturing process and all the steps. Very different than the tailorized work in auto factories, for example, that we've known. So to the extent that those workers understand the entire process, that's part of training. It helps to motivate them because they can see how they could move from one machine to another, or very possibly move from being a machine operator up to being something like a maintenance technician. That's an aspect of good jobs that seems to be kind of characteristic of at least some sectors of the energy industry. And it's good because I hope it's going to bring more young people into the industry, and we can really show them that there's a career path there and it's a sustainable career for the future.
It's a great call out, Dan. Thank you for adding that to the conversation. Let me see if there's one or two more comments, and then I want to make sure we leave time for the fourth group to report out. Any other comments here? Well, Maureen and Chris and Becky, thank you guys for the work you've done in this space. Appreciate you. All right, and with that, we're going to move over to the fourth group today, scope, prioritization, and targeting. And for that, we will turn to Gerard.
Yes, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And then to all of my other chairs, I want to say amen. Pretty much there'll be a lot of echoing. I probably should just say echo group 1, 2, and 3 as I make my recommendations, because we concur with all of your recommendations. I do like to say a very much a thank to all my committee members who've been with me, Allison and Kay and Tom. without your guidance, these recommendations wouldn't be as strong. And with a lot of these recommendations, I think a lot of it's a concurrence that it's hard to narrow when you're trying to do of something of this growth and magnitude and opportunity we have for our community, for all of our communities. Just kind of narrowing the recommendations is a challenge, but we're getting there. We're on I think our second or third revision from our first recommendations, but that's resolving. So let's jump into the recommendations that we have so far, and they will probably be tweaked a little bit as we move forward. Our committee is scope prioritizations, prioritization and industry targeting needs. So a lot of our conversations has been, I think there is a growing awareness of regarding the gap, and I think Missy kind of highlighted that in a lot of our communications to me, and being part with other groups, that there is no really broad or SIT code or next code of energy jobs. I think that is something that should be developed too. So especially for particularly on individuals who are coming through the K-12 system, kind of having a broader understanding what are these energy jobs are about, and how are we working towards our climate goals so we have a safer and brighter future for our kids and grandkids. But what we have found, what is in place, and there is a huge gap. One, and Dr. Germain could probably talk about this more too. My 10 years as a community college administrator, and pretty much another 10 years at two different governors for Department of Labor as administrator. I saw the rapid decline in public investing in community and technical colleges. Really, it went from almost 70% state funded at community technical colleges to 30% self funding coming from tuition fees. Now it's almost reversed pretty much across the state. Even as community colleges are getting local property taxes, the college pretty much have to come up with 70% of their funding, where the federal state government is pretty much providing 30% of that funding. So huge disparities. And at the same time, we all know that healthcare costs are going through the roof, and just our buildings are very old, and the fact of nothing's getting cheaper. So already we're kind of dealing with a swimming upstream for a lot of these training providers. And I'm sure unions and everybody else are still dealing with these legacy costs that they're also doing with retirements and so forth, moving funding. So the training dollar is very small. And for example, it's been estimated from the World Economic Institute, I think, that the U.S. needs to double the amount of investment each year to bridge the gap of technology and training needs. Another group almost said another 72 billion annually per year to bridge the gap. So there's a huge gap already on just the funding and what needs to happen within our infrastructure of our training arms, either from a union or community colleges, or even if employers are trying to do training. So that needs to be addressed up front, and then all the other factors of supporting good training, like nighttime and affordable childcare, so somebody who's working can have their child be taken care of while they're training at night, because they're typically working during the day and so forth. So our first recommendation is investing in training and related infrastructure to meet the energy workforce demands and broaden the talent pipeline and supporting skills. So I gave you the broad of that. More detail is also to provide funding and support establishing and expanding high quality training, including programs offered by unions, apprenticeship ready programs that are doing very good jobs of building a pipeline, community technical colleges, and also partnering with our community-based organizations. Another detailed part of that is, one thing that's been very clear in this item 1 is not splintering the occupations that are in need. A lot of these jobs that we have in place to help us future-proof our economy and our energy are legacy skill crafts. For example, we have a lot of support of electricians, licensed electricians doing solar work, and just not having solar panel installers where a company just wants to do solar panel installs and then have a couple electricians to do the work. We're very much an advocate of trained solar because it is a quicker entry for somebody working Circle K or don't have a job to get into the industry. Train them on the safety, use of ladders, installing the panels, locking them down and so forth. But train them in an apprenticeship program where they are becoming a licensed electrician, that's convenient to the company and to the worker, so they can become a licensed electrician. So when the solar work is no longer there or needed, they could still do a lot of other work, working on panels, troubleshooting electrical work, and so forth. They're just more versatile after after the bundle of work is moving forward. So whatever we need to do is not splinter the occupation, but stack into existing occupations that are there. Very recommendation that has come from all our interviews. And then, so jumping quickly, just for sake of time, facilitating relationships between energy and workforce development stakeholders. I think the beauty of this EWOB, obviously Department of Energy kind of knew early on, they may not be workforce development experts, but they are energy experts. And then people like Department of Labor are not energy experts. And others, SNAP, people who have community development block grant fundings in their funding streams. They know housing, they know how to do, maybe pay for supportive service, stuff like that, but they don't understand quite the trends or how quickly this transition is going. So I think the facilitation of partnering with organizations where you groups that understand energy, like the labs or national labs and all the other initiatives under Department of Energy, are collaborating with people who are kind of in their purview is dealing with workforce development. But at the same time, providing space, even as funding or support for people on the ground. It could be like tribal organizations or progressive community-based organizations that may not have the bandwidth to respond to a FOA or something like that, is make sure they're part of the mix, either a local sector strategy or their voice is being included as we evolved with this energy transition. And then also our report, we have so many I just don't have enough time to go through all the detailed recommendations. I'm sure a lot of my committee members also have commit to. So, and I think the last one, and I guess also part of this too, I do want to highlight, this is in 3, is measuring and ensuring equitable access and success for the broadest set of workers. I think there's a lot of opportunities, even with Bill, IRA, and CHIPS. Again, you hear 3 million jobs annually with all these, with the lifespan of these occupations. So there are opportunities. We want to make sure they're for people who have been traditionally left out of this occupations. Like we mentioned before, 70% of the occupations now are primarily white male. I think there's a lot of opportunities for more white males to get jobs, but also a tremendous opportunity if we're very strategic on the awareness, like we mentioned before, of talking about and demonstrating pathways for women and people of color in these occupations. We can do that. One recommendation that came out of this was, I think also kind of, let me jump to it, is one aspect I just want to highlight now is there, some people are familiar with, it's called the Trade Adjustment Act, and that was put in back really 2012. This was something that was put in place. Long and short, it went from 2012 to 2017. This was a DOL funded initiative where they did broad sets of occupations that were in demand, and it was through a sector strategy. Sector strategies are basically geared upon a single or a combination of occupations that coalesce within each other. and they kind of splinter off like manufacturing or petrochemical or energy. And you build a pipeline towards that. And good sector strategies have community-based organizations at the table, training providers at the table, and then any other support groups that help support the pipeline into the training program and after the training program. And also the key thing is evolving with employer needs, and employers are at the table too. That funding has stopped, but it was a $1.9 billion investment during those 5 years. And under TACT, they were able to work with 700 community colleges, and then over 320,000 recognized credentials were earned through that process. Like with everything, there's some lessons learned with TAC, but I think this is a framework that we are supporting within our recommendations. Just like Maureen said, we still will like everything to be more defined of who received the training and who benefit from the training, more detailed. English, if there are students of English as a second language, race, minority, if the students had any barriers of the support, I think that those measurements also need to be made for those training providers and outcomes. But so that's one recommendation. And I think also the supporting of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, which made up of basically TCUs, about 32 TCUs across the nation within this broadening the access. So once again, leveraging what's happening well and what could be recreated. Like the TAC program I mentioned before, that was broad sets of skill sets. I think there's enough demand that we have for a TAC 2.0 for the energy sector in particular, and just not just a broad, CDL, healthcare, and all that stuff. Those things need to be addressed, and there's opportunities for those. But I think we need to be very focused on the next couple of years that we have in place on what's tangible and doable. Let me stop there. I skipped over a lot of our recommendations for the sake of time, and let me answer any questions that the rest of the EWOB may have.
Thanks for that, Gerard. I know that you all had a tremendous number of recommendations, and you did a great job of summarizing them into kind of the top takeaways. I know that was tough. Questions, comments for this team? Well, that's what happens when you go last. Everybody's brains are just starting to ignite with so much thinking in there.
I'm curious, did I say something maybe challenging or maybe not in agreement, or is there something that we also need to consider that we haven't considered?
Missy, I've got a comment.
Okay, let me go to Becky first, and then we'll go over to Tom.
I just wanted to say, Gerard, thank you for adding some of the stuff that we had talked about. Some of this is not reinventing the wheel. Traditional trades, we're having a hard time getting young people involved in them and are interested in them because they don't know the job is there. It's kind of that Mike Rowe statement that they've kind of been ignored, and a kid can't get a job in trades, craft trades, skilled trades, metal trades, even as an electrician, if they don't know the jobs exist. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. The unions have done a pretty good job of promoting trades, and that's going to be a big thing. When you think about grid, or you think about manufacturing of batteries, or new vehicles, or any new, even wind, that takes skilled people to do it, and you have to have the young people to take the jobs over when we retire. So a lot of us are getting there. So thank you very much, Gerard, and your team.
Welcome. Well, thank you for your input. I think myself or Megan interviewed pretty much everybody here in this group, and thank you for your time through the past couple of months for the interviews and for your information and wisdom guiding us. So thank you.
Thanks. Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Gerard on behalf of our subcommittee. I thought he did a great job of, pulling together a lot of kind of disparate threads and putting them into some good recommendations. Missy, you had asked for themes. I just wanted to say one thing. one challenge, and this runs across some of our reports, it runs across the report that Gerard just did, and there's one of the other subcommittees mentioned this before, in terms of reaching out to young people for these jobs. The one thing that we have learned over the last couple of years, and there's an expression that goes with it, I think it's if you can't see it, you won't be it. So in terms of positive imagery, and we do struggle with that at times, and I think the DOE could be helpful if they could get, for all of us here and just, moving forward to have a small repository of images, particularly of women doing DOE work, clean energy work, because that's really important for us in terms of, just reaching out to people. We think in terms of recruiting women into construction, that has to start in grade school, at elementary school, with elementary school counselors and elementary teachers. And it's all about just, planting the idea in young girls' heads that this is not only a job that you should think about, that it's a really good job where you can support your family, by yourself. So I just want to ask that of our DOE colleagues, if they could help us with those positive images, that would be really helpful in our own work.
Thanks for the suggestion there with the imagery, Tom. Appreciate that. And I think you raise a really good point. Anything else for this team? We have come up with collectively as a group 19 recommendations, and there's probably another 100 and some in terms of sub recommendations. So I think for the first report we are doing, as we've tried to look at the ocean and figure out what to boil first, I think it's an admirable 19. I know we've got to turn to public comments in just a couple of minutes, but I want to just pull out what Tom started to tease for us a bit here, and that is common themes. Anyone else want to share anything that really stood out to them in terms of commonality as you were hearing the different reports? And or I'm going to just, in interest of time, put both of them out there, either commonality or any things that you felt were gaps in the work that we've done so far.
Missy, I'll just quickly say messaging. Across the board, we got to do a better job messaging energy holistically. So whatever that looks like, I'm all for it.
Yeah. On that vein, I guess I would also say data. We don't really have very good data on a lot of these things. And I think, messaging is one thing, but I think we want to be clear about what we're marketing. And I don't think we have very good data on, I think that was the key thing I was trying to drive home in the job quality report, is that we just don't have very good data on job quality. So if we look at an industry that is struggling to attract workers, or where turnover is high, or things, those are, we think of basic job quality indicators are sort of like, does it provide basic economic stability? So what do we know about, people's basic financial health, right? Does it provide opportunities? And I think everybody spoke to this, the importance of jobs providing opportunities to learn and grow in the sector, right? That's a key part of a good job. And yet we don't have very much information about the degree to which that's happening, the equity implications, like for whom is that happening? And then the third indicator we look at a lot is just turnover, right? So if you're losing people, that is a sign that there's problems. So I think if we are truly worried about workforce shortages, we need to look not just at how do we market things to people, but how do we actually sort of really see the jobs and see where maybe there needs to be some other interventions considered, so that we're selling a good product, basically. So I think that's important not to lose attention to. And I guess I should say, I've seen these marketing campaigns not work out when they start with, oh, the main thing is to reach to high school, middle school, elementary school, pre-K, whatever, but they're not looking at sort of, well, why aren't the people in those jobs referring people to those jobs? And what is their perspective on it? And I think it's really important to take that into account.
Excellent. If I may, I'd like to share two things that I heard but weren't stated. Kind of a reading between the lines. I think I heard from this, and what was mentioned is historical practices for filling jobs in the industry can't continue as we've always been as they've always happened. We need everybody working together. I've heard, Department of Labor needs to work with us. Educators are critical in making sure that we're getting people into these jobs. Employers have to work together. Nonprofits. I think I heard kind of the old way of doing business won't get us to the finish line here. So I loved hearing that, and that reinforces, I think, the importance of this moment and this board's job is to make sure we are hearing those voices and making recommendations accordingly. And then I think I heard, and I think this goes back to day one, the importance of us working as a sector. I think, Gerard, it was your group talking about, electricians, if you're or maybe you said in solar, if you're working in solar, train somebody for the immediacy, but look at what's next for them in the energy industry. We'll probably see flows of what's hot now. That may fade a little bit, but let's not lose that person we've done so much to attract. Let's keep them in a career path, which is a conversation that surfaced a lot today. So I just wanted to pull those unstated things that I heard in the conversation. Anything else? And I'm enjoying the comments, a lot of good things in the chat. Thank you for those that are filling some commentary there. So Piper, let me ask you a point of order question here. I know we have the benefit of making some time for public comment. Should we go there first and then we can go back to the timeline and next steps logistically?
Yeah, that sounds great. We only have one public commenter today, and that is Andrew Reamer. So Andrew, if you want to go ahead and give us your comment.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. And Piper, how many minutes do I have?
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Andrew Reamer, research professor, colleague of Dan's at George Washington University. I work with Third Way on a clean energy industrial strategy. We have a convening this Friday in which a lot of DOE people are showing up. So I have a background in this stuff around industrial policy, workforce development. Looking at the charge the secretary's given you and looking at your recommendations, I think you've missed the mark. In that the secretary's charge to you is to come up with findings that drive a strategy. And you've come up with a set of principles, really a wish list, and it's a very good wish list. But it's data free and it's institution free. It doesn't tell them how to do anything. It's just what the outcome should be. I would imagine that if you gave this assignment to people at DOE on the staff, they could come up with most of this stuff on their own. So the secretary's charge is a difficult one because it's asking you to do research and analysis that, this is not your daytime job. I would encourage you going forward to, part of your charge is to understand who's doing what elsewhere in DOE and other federal agencies, and what can DOE do to produce better outcomes. The federal government works in silos, as you know, and you have put yourself in another silo. You have not mentioned any other organization in the department or elsewhere. NSF, Office of Science Technology Policy. You can play a great role, and I played this kind of role at Department of Labor and the Workforce Information Advisory Council, introducing people at DOE to each other and to people in other agencies. So there are ahas, and you put other people to work on your issues. Maureen talked about the absence of data. There is an absence of data, but there's actually a lot of data that was been unmentioned. I put a bunch of things in the chat, PSEO, the National Training, Education, and Workforce Survey that NSF is putting out. There's a ton of stuff that's going on that is absolutely relevant to DOE. Some of it's energy specific, most of it's not. But there's a lot you can do to turn the light bulbs on in the heads of the people in the silos at DOE. The Office of Technology Transitions, Vanessa Chan, the MESC, the Manufacturing and Employment Energy Supply Chains. There is a learning agenda. There's a 5-year learning agenda the DOE is supposed to put together. What questions do they have that they're going to gather evidence on? And I will stop in a moment. It's a terrible learning agenda. So there's an opportunity for you to influence what other people are doing. And what you've put together here, I don't think is going to have much of an impact, frankly, given all the hard work you did. So I'm concerned.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us for the call today. I know everybody's got busy time, so we appreciate your making time to be part of this group for the last hour and a half. It's challenging to come in, I think, and see a slide with a couple of recommendations from each group without the benefit of the other 12 or in some cases 20 pages that went behind the recommendations that we're seeing today. I would like to give you some degree of confidence that in the part that's still in draft form that hasn't been shared, there are some excellent examples that members of the board have pulled forward, excellent examples, a lot of pieces of data where it exists, and also some challenges that have been recommended from what's been seen in other organizations, really trying to bring this interagency coordination. Because everything is in draft form, we weren't able to share it today. All members of the board have received all of the recommendations, and a lot of what wasn't able to be mentioned will certainly be there in appendix form. So I wanted to just share some of those things. Chris?
Thanks. Agreeing with everything Melissa said, but I think, Andrew, it was a good challenge because even in this process, sometimes I felt like, oh, are we just another silo, adding on to the noise? So at least this is how I feel about where we are in the process now. Is we brought together this interdisciplinary group, a lot of different specialties within the advisory board. And it took us a while to kind of gel and see some themes, and maybe you're seeing those come together now. And I take your comments as maybe a challenge of how do we think strategically now about, not just providing a list of recommendations, but how do we, help DOE think strategically about this?
Thank you. When you look at the Secretary's charge, the Secretary does not ask for a recommendation. The Secretary asks for a strategy. I don't see the bullets as a strategy.
Gerard?
No, Andrew, I really appreciate your comments. And, I think, like I said, a lot of this I mentioned before. I think DOE has its expertise broadly, and then there's other departments that have a workforce charge, but they have a lack of knowledge of, carbon capture. What is hydrogen going to take place? Is it going to take place or not? DOE may have a better lens on that. How should we train diesel technicians into hydrogen, or when and where? So in our recommendations, we did talk a lot about that interagency, but you don't have the benefit of that. But I'm really glad I like that, because we struggled that on too. It's like what actionable items that we can prevent forward, and with whom of leveraging knowledge and expertise and funding us to move forward. So I really appreciate those comments. And even we're still tweaking our recommendations. We make sure we try to keep what your recommendations are in mind.
Thank you. I just offer one.
Thank you, Andrew, for your comment. I'm sorry, we have to move on to the next section, but I do appreciate the thoughts you put into this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Piper. Thank you. And with that, I think if we want to pull back up the slide presentation, I think we can talk a bit about logistics as we move forward. All right. And I'm going to turn this over to, I believe, to Team Berkeley to walk us through some of the next steps of the process.
Thanks, Melissa. Team Berkeley asked me to take this one on. As has been mentioned several times, we've got the wonderful recommendations from all of the subcommittees. We've spent the last week since we got them on the 8th digesting them and trying to do what you all did today. That is put them in categories, consolidate them, pull out common themes, and try to figure out how to take what you've all the volume and depth that you've all provided and turn those into concise recommendations that to the last discussion are also strategic. We're continuing to work with DOE back and forth on doing that work. The next step is to get out to all of you an initial draft that encompasses the recommendations, and you may see those again in slightly different order and slightly different form, but we hope that they recommend the full depth of what you've provided. And so we'll be looking obviously for your response to all of that to make sure that we haven't missed anything and that you agree with the ways that we've merged or consolidated and organized all of your work. And the themes that we've pulled out, and we'll embed the results of this conversation in that work. So we'll get to you all a draft February 1st. And we're going to be asking you to to get your responses back to us by February 9th, if at all possible, and no later than February 14th. We've got a pretty tight production timeline, but so look for that draft in your inboxes on February 1st and you try to get back to us by February 9th or 14th. After we incorporate your feedback in that round, there'll be a full board meeting currently scheduled for February 23rd. Another opportunity for this kind of deep discussion about what's been turned into a report format. And then another opportunity for a round of edits. Right now, we're proposing to get you all back a round 2 draft on February 23rd. And then a really hard deadline for responses back from you all on March 1st. After March 1st, we're going to have a really tight timeline to get your final edits revised and into production with the hope that we can have them ready to present formally on this March 21st presentation to the Secretary. We've also been asked to support the development of a slide deck for that presentation, and my expectation, my guess is that at the February meeting, the committee will be talking about how what process you want to use to present the report to the Secretary at that March meeting.
Thanks, Pam. Questions anyone may have? Amanda?
What is the format you would like for the feedback? I mean, are we all sort of redlining a document, or what's the?
I think that's a great question, and I should have mentioned this, Amanda. I think it would be pretty effective if you could work in your subcommittees to get your feedback to your subcommittee chairs, and then have each subcommittee provide feedback. But we're certainly open if there's another process that would work better. And in terms of practical format, we're okay with comments and red lines. We'll be getting it to you in a Word document. So we're okay with comments and feedback in the document, but we're also okay with emailed responses that talk about broader themes, or we think you've misorganized it in this way, or we said this and we think that's a powerful recommendation, and we see that you've merged it with another recommendation and we think it deserves to stand on its own. Those kinds of comments may be done in an email. And folks can also arrange to have conversations. It's a pretty short timeline, but if there are things that you think would be best expressed in a conversation, we'll certainly be happy to get on the phone with you.
So Pam, everyone has now received the initial raw documents created by the subcommittees.
Yep.
And they had comments from Maya and Piper and some from me as well. Do you want us to stop with comments on those and sending those to individual subcommittees? Because I believe you're taking what you've gotten so far and turning it into the first draft. I want to make sure we're not kind of duplicating efforts or wasting time of having comments happening here when you're taking that and putting pen to paper. What would you recommend on that?
In another document? I think we're going to have to do this is messy, Missy, but I think there's going to be a bit of a parallel process, because I think some subcommittees are still refining, have expressed that they're still refining some of the work that they've already done. What I can tell you, what I can tell you is we're paying attention to those emails as they come through, and we're trying to incorporate them in the first. We've got a first draft already written, And we're trying to incorporate the email traffic and frankly, the conversation that we heard today in that draft before February 1st and get it to you. So I think there's going to be a bit of a parallel process. So I would say that for the moment, the subcommittees can still work on each other's drafts. The window for that is closing, right? Because by February 1st, we need to get something in your hands. Once we get that in your hands, I would say that all work should really be focused on that draft, and we'll retain the previous documents for source material to go back to and refine.
So would it make sense to say maybe a respectful request, all comments due on what's been circulated so far, maybe by the end of this week, the 26th? And then after that, people can still keep reading, but at that point in time, maybe they save their comments for the first draft.
Really appreciate that process clarification. Good idea. Yeah.
Okay. So this week, end of this week, for any comments to what you've already received in your inboxes.
Yeah.
Gerard? Okay, perfect. Okay. Anything else on logistics anyone wants to talk through?
So Dan's hand.
Yes, Pam, could you and your colleagues there at Berkeley put some thought and writing into this strategy issue? How does the work that we have done actually consist of a strategy and not just a group of kind of unconnected recommendations? The strategy, I think, is the overall framework that we can use to understand this. And in my mind, a strategy has a lot to do with institutionalization. How can we bring together the individual, very diverse activities going on in many parts of the country into a strategy that recognizes trends, recognizes how local areas are prioritizing particular issues, such as a provision of childcare. But I think it would benefit the report as a whole to address the strategy that is being put together here.
Appreciate that, Dan, and appreciate that direction. And I think that there is some of that that's already emerging in the sense of overarching findings, but absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think I will turn things back over to Piper to close us out for the day.
Thanks, Missy. Sorry, I was trying to unshare my screen. Thank you all for such a productive meeting today. Before I go ahead and close this out, just one comment from Maya and I. We are putting together a pretty comprehensive calendar of everything that the EWAB has done and is doing. So if you would be able to CC the ewab@hq.doe.gov email address and just add that to any of your subcommittee check-ins, we'll be happy to cover them and also be sure to then incorporate the comments that you make in them into the report, like Pam was just talking about. And I will put that in writing during our follow-up to this meeting. But with that, I will close out this meeting. And so this meeting is formally adjourned. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you all.
Great job to everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.